Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to another episode of GTM Innovators by 360 Insights. I'm your host, Kyle James. And today we're diving into, I don't know, I like to think about this as AI as the Babelfish, maybe. Um, Joining me today is Sara Rosso. Sarah, I never assume I get anybody's name right. Is Rosso the right way to pronounce it?
Rosso is fine, or Rosso depends. I think
Rosso.
Rosso. You can say Rosso.
Awesome. And Sarah is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Smartcat. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So I always like to start these things out like learning a little bit more about your origin story and then kind of how it brought you to SmartCat. Then we'll talk about all the really interesting stuff y'all are doing, kind of translating and solving this whole Babelfish layer. We'll just use that for the people that are fans of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? I know we've got some nerds out there. But you have such a fascinating background, having spent time at HP and Ogilvy and Automattic and HubSpot leading up to where you are now. So I would, always just like this is much for me as anybody else kind of leading into this. Like, talk to us a little bit about that journey. I'm sure there must be some interesting parts along the way that kind of led you to this and kind of what you're doing now, kind of in product marketing.
Yeah, I think, and probably similar to other product marketers who very few of us have had a very linear journey. I started off pretty technical, actually. So I was a systems engineer doing network engineering at HP, and moved to Italy, lived there for 13 years, and through a technical position at an ad agency, which was Ogilvy, doing everything but coding, so managing databases and all their email infrastructure. Became more of a let's like kind of like a techno whisperer and translating the technical pieces to non-technical people. And so just started moving more into like digital strategy and consulting. And so I think that the two halves of me of the wanting to know how something works and getting deeper into something and then like being able to tell somebody who maybe doesn't want all those details is actually a perfect match for product marketing. So,
You sound
I
like
think
me. Like I tell everybody my bad joke is like, I'm the guy, if you've ever seen the movie Office Space, I'm that guy. Like I talk to the engineers, dang it. I talk to the customers, dang it. Like that
yeah.
translation area, you just do it more in probably writing, right?
Yeah, and I think and also kind of thinking about like what the customer gets out of it and how it fits into their bigger goals, right? So whatever most of the things we have are not complete solutions for everything anyone's working on. So I think that's the part you have to kind of get in their heads, and I like that. So yeah, so and I think I don't know if everyone on here is a HubSpot alum, probably not, but like I had a stint at HubSpot as well, where I was speaking more to developers and the technical people who are customizing the platform, and spent 10 years at Automattic as a very early employee, and that's WordPress.com
Yeah.
VIP, and did kind of both the scaling piece of it as well as putting in systems and growth product marketing. So now I'm a Smartcat, and I think what drew me to this. First of all, AI is going to change our jobs, whether or not
Mhm.
we want it to. And I keep saying someone's like AI is coming for our jobs, and I think in some cases, yes, there'll be some professions that maybe disappear, but I think it's probably more likely that a peer is coming for your job who knows how to use AI. And I think that's something that like we need to be learning as much as we can.
We should
And
double click back to that, like like there's definitely a conversation in that little element, but keep going. Just making a
Yeah.
note.
And I mean, so for me, it's like, I've always been kind of on the technical bent. I love software. I love kind of playing around. I had a sabbatical and I started making GPTs because I was also like on the fence. Do I get closer to AI? What do I do? And started making GPTs and just kind of like, and then just started getting that like thrill, that excitement that I got when I started blogging, when I started making my own BE books, when I started, hand coding my websites back in the day. So I
Yeah.
think I wanted to follow that a little bit more. And Smartcat's a company that's doing really cool things with AI, really deep roots in language and not just like translation, because I think, beyond like a simple translation, but getting smarter every time, it's really built for enterprises. So anytime you want it to learn and you want it to get better every time, or you're doing it in a workflow, we have AI and human oversight. So that part is really interesting in terms of how the collaboration is, but we're also getting into content generation and some other things. So that's why I was excited to join. And, plus living 13 years in Europe, like you realize that like English is not the center of the world. And
Yeah.
it's really important and sometimes really expensive for people to think or roll out things in multiple languages. So I think that was kind of a really interesting intersection. And it did spark my, now that I'm playing with the product and stuff, it's exciting.
That's awesome. So let's kind of like dive in a little bit more for people, just kind of, so they could get a better understanding of kind of what Smartcat does. Like I joked at the beginning, right? It's kind of the Babelfish element, but like what are some use cases and like things that people are using it for? What are pain points that it's solving now for customers?
Well, I think marketing is a huge one, actually. So, when you think about doing global, or let's just call them even like multinational campaigns,
Hmm.
you may have and actually this is a perfect example, Ogilvy, right? I used to work at a place that we would receive ads from brands that I won't mention that had and they needed them translated into Italian. So the old way was you had a partner that was local and that you sent it to them and you waited and it came back and you used it. And I think that's not the way that you should be doing it anymore, right? I think there's better ways to do it, and so that's one of the pain points is like getting all those folks in one place. So, translating campaigns, people are doing marketing materials, but we have it all the way to legal and compliance. That's really think about legal
Wow.
notices and things like that. We have teams that are using that to send it out in native languages where people have to understand like really important information. And if you give it to them only in English, you really risk. So, learning and development is also another place where we excel and do, like course translation and and then that gets really deep into like company strategy, upskilling, making sure that, global companies can actually reach their own internal employees and keep them longer and train them up. So that's just kind of a taste, but yeah, there's a lot.
So what do you think, like, I'm just curious, right? Because these things are good and they're getting better all the time. Like, what is the hit rate that they're correct or that they miss things or that they hallucinate when you're talking about like the translation content piece? Is it 95% plus now that and it even gets dialect and things correct all the time, or how much do you have to kind of watch that and have a person over, double checking everything?
Well, surprisingly, I would actually say a lot of our customers want a person in the loop. So
Hmm.
human in the loop, it's actually important to them so that they can have it checked. And I think what we're thinking about now, and this gets back to my own profession later, is like we think about this 80-20, right?
Sure.
Like before you would have a human person do it 100%. And then,
Hmm.
you go through, I think we're looking for those 80-20 solutions now where we can get to 80 or 90 or 95%. And then you save that skilled human labor for looking at the nuances, for looking at those corrections, and then you have other tools where you can give it glossaries and you can make edits that it learns from. But I think that's the point that we're trying to tap into. One is bringing everything in one place. So even if you have an agency, get them on the platform. But secondly, those shoulder taps, which, I don't know if you've ever been the recipient of a shoulder tap where someone's like, hey, can you look at this for me? That still happens in pretty
Yeah.
much every company. So it's also being more respectful of those folks' time so that, you have AI, we have a marketplace. So a lot of people use AI translation, then a freelancer, and save that final slice for someone who really only has to look at a little bit of it. So I think that's kind of when I think about AI is like getting you to a really good place.
Yeah.
And then as you use it more, obviously it gets to know you and it could get you to a great place. But I think that's kind of the time saver, right?
That's
It's
so
and it's
cool
it's a
though.
speed because another thing too is like you may think of it as like linear, like I do this, and but like you could do 12 languages in a minute. Like I mean, you could do it all in a group. So I think that bulk processing piece of it too is kind of hard to think about.
Well, and I'm curious too, because I'll admit I haven't played a lot with the translation piece of AI, but one thing I really enjoy about using AI is like I write like I talk. It's run-on sentences and all that. I imagine these things probably put out pretty grammatically correct content too, right?
Oh yes. Yeah, and
It,
that's when then we start getting into things like content generation in different languages. I mean, if you have source content, obviously it should be picking up on how you've already decided to write it formally,
yeah,
informally. It understands that context, it understands tone. You can give it additional instructions, but you can also do, like if you have brand names or if you have specific phrases, colloquialisms don't translate. I mean, the one example is like we use a lot of baseball in the
hmm,
United States. Baseball, that's a home run, that kind of stuff. The AI can know to translate that when it goes into another country to something
sure.
that's more relevant, like maybe,
Soccer even
football
or,
and
or
yeah,
football, yeah,
football/soccer, right? As they would call it in Europe, which would be football, right? So I
yeah.
think those are things that you can teach AI as well, but it can get you there pretty close.
Well, that's cool too. Like, and going back to your, I didn't know we'd get here this fast, but like going back to your comment at the beginning of like, it's not taking your jobs, but thinking about the people that can leverage that. Like, I imagine traditionally these translators also had to be like what I was just saying earlier, like great grammatically clean up, right, clean, and they don't need to do that anymore. They need to know the local dialects more. So the people that have those skills, kind of, that's where it's probably changing a little bit, right?
Right. And you can give it edits and it can learn in like in our specific case. But I go, and I think that's where you start to get into like these enterprise solutions versus like something you and I can just pop into a web browser and use. Like you're not going
Right.
to get the continuous learning piece. You're not going to get the country specific. And so for some people who, they operate in 7 official languages of the company, they're going to need something a little more sophisticated than that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Like, and I'm thinking too, like I recently had a conversation with a company, beekeeper who has a frontline mobile app for frontline employees, right? And a
Mhm.
lot of frontline employees, English isn't their native language, whether they're in the warehouse or, a job site or, restaurant or whatnot. So having something that you could translate and keep it in their native language, like it's super, super useful to them. But it's got me
Yeah.
thinking too, like there's probably a lot of these cases where that 80% is good enough just for like trying to communicate things to them where I don't necessarily need it cleaned up perfect for, marketing purposes. But if they understand what I'm doing and I'm just able to, do it very quickly, like you said, in minutes and but on a website or in a mobile app that translate it, that's probably incredibly powerful, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I think the difference is the 80% now can happen in maybe a minute or two
Mhm.
minutes. Whereas before, to get there, again, you're sending it to somebody, they're elaborating it, they're sending it back. You're not, so I think like you still have the opportunity if let's just say it's between 10 to 20%, that's where you're spending your time.
Yeah,
And you're not spending on it waiting and that kind of thing. So I think that's interesting. I mean, like and getting back to kind of like the skilled person, well, the example you were giving, that's another example of how folks are using it for, like safety and compliance. Like,
yeah,
so like think about how important is like on job compliance or on job safety for something. If you don't understand something in your native language, you
right.
might injure yourself or others or customers or so that's like something we've also seen quite a few people that just love being able to make sure it lands. Yeah, so like getting into legal, getting into compliance, also getting into safety for sure.
So let's go there. You said something really interesting that's got me thinking like, what industries are you seeing get the most success out of this? Because we're talking about stuff all over the board, but I imagine there's certain ones that this is exponentially more valuable and useful for than others, right?
Well, I think that's a really good. So there's so many layers here, right? One is like
Yeah,
adoption of AI in what industries, and I would think that's something that in some industries they are definitely embracing it faster,
sure.
right? And so when we can come in with a use case like I just told you about in an industry that maybe isn't adopting it in other places like manufacturing, that proves some business value to them, right? Pretty
Absolutely.
immediately. So that's one example. But I'd say we're seeing AI adoption like pretty strong across a lot of places. Maybe some of the like we're helping them do like manuals and medical things. So
Mhm.
I think like it's pretty widespread. It's more about who's putting the effort into either communicating with customers in different languages, communicating internally different languages, or they're trying to like generate revenue,
Sure.
and that gets back into the marketing. So I don't know if I would like again. I think this is like a winners losers kind of conversation on AI, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's just like there's going to be some people in every industry that are going to be acting faster, and they're probably the ones that are going to be um, winning compared to their competitors because they're going to start to see that exponential speed, the efficiency, that kind of stuff.
Well, it's interesting because like the more I keep thinking about it, like the translation layer falls into these kind of like no-brainer things for AI, right? Like you've got things like we hear the number one case I hear a lot of business talk about is like the call transcripts, right? Give me summaries, be able to recap calls. And then all the intelligence other people in the company can pull from that. That's one. Another one you hear. This is clearly one of those, right? Like it's a no-brainer why you shouldn't be embracing this to do this kind of stuff and translate faster. But even for a go-to-market motion, right? If you're trying
Mm-hmm.
to go to new,
I think people
LATAM,
are skipping
wherever.
it though. That's the thing is that so when you, I think here's how I think about it. I think that people see the value, right? And I
Hmm.
think that people see the value of communicating. I think that before though, they think of it as a delay. or something that happens at the end of a motion where the groups we're working with are bringing it they're bringing it up to the front, right? They're putting it
Sure.
into their plans, they're putting it into, and so then they're able to do, and like we have examples where like they did one language, now they're doing 8 languages. Every rollout is 8 languages. So I think that's the shift is that companies who aren't getting it and figuring out how it can change engagement or adoption or acceleration are tacking it on at the end and like just get it out.
Yeah.
And when we show them the speed, then they're like, oh, okay, actually this needs to be a part of like the core project and the strategy of us
Sure.
doing this out. And like and you know, I think we're starting to get into this like do more with less kind of era. And I think that's going to be around for a while. So it's also like, how do we find new sources of growth? How do we find, and that's when you can start to think of doing things like experimenting in new markets and trying things where, you know, we just came out with I'm actually really excited about this. We just came out with an image translator. So it's image to image translation. So
Talk,
preserves your
tell me
background.
more.
Yeah. So you can give it a finished image and it'll give you back a finished image with the translation, but you can do some tweaking and move. You can change fonts. You can move things around. You can
So it's like
hide pieces.
it's like text embedded in the image that you can then swap out. Like, am I?
So think of an ad. Think of an
Okay.
ad with text in it.
Yeah.
We can do an ad like you. So here's a great example. I'm a marketer. I got ads from my designer who's very talented but also very busy. And maybe,
Mm.
you know, like, you know, he gave me this finished ad and, you know, I ran it and it's, you know, out of the six ones that we ran, this one's actually performing well. Why don't we try it in other markets
Mm.
instead of having to go back to him and have him re-elaborate everything, which he's maybe moved on to another project or something. I can pop it in the image translator and get a finished image and do some quick little, like if I need to reposition
Wow.
things, and then I have a finished JPEG or PNG or whatever. So it's like it's image to image, and then you also get the benefit of all the learning and the glossaries and things like that. And I think this is again back to the whole thing where I think about his 80/20 time. I might just be like, hey, I did this in 12 languages. Can you just go in and do your polishing on it? Where
Yeah.
he's not getting a text document and then placing things. I mean, like, think even about that, like how you might do that in the past. Here's the translation file of all the translations. Can you go in and swap those kinds of things? So I think
It's a lot of
also
rework.
respecting his time. If you wanted to have him in that flow, you could just pull him into the platform and do that. So I think it's about like what these new workflows look like, what the AI
Yeah.
and human oversight and human in the loop workflows look like. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how we change.
That's a use case I didn't even think of. So now you've got my mind spinning all these other use cases. Like, do you have companies that use this to like do the rewrite translation inside their product, right? Like they have language libraries.
Absolutely.
Like that
Yes. Yeah.
seems
I
like
mean, I
another.
didn't get to product engineering when we were listing off of this. We have companies that are using it for rapid prototyping. So
Mm,
if they are doing interface changes, they can do it. So you can do it directly with like our integrations. We have companies who are translating videos on the fly so that their primarily English speaking legal teams
so
can
it's got all
understand the
the audio
contents.
instead of just the text base. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, we do audio, video, images, and then doc. Like we do like about 80 content types. So you can do content to content translation, so PowerPoint to PowerPoint, or that kind of thing. So it's not like primary. That's the thing. It's way beyond text. So that's
Yeah.
cool. But I think yeah, the product engineering teams are using it more for software localization. We're seeing people translate, you know, product screens, diagrams, those kinds of things.
And I'm wondering too, like I wrote a question I want to come back to in a minute because I think it's kind of the philosophical where this goes. But um I imagine too, like if I'm sending somebody an email, I can have it then translate it, then they can open it up and instantly read it in their native language. I mean, there's some stuff that does that now, but if it's a plugin that does it natively and enables teams to communicate with each other faster. God, there's so many use cases that just seem like low-hanging fruit just to run with.
Yeah, support teams are also another great, like maybe either understanding
Hmm.
something or a screenshot. They can do a quick translation. I mean, that can just help them get to again the 80/20, right? Instead of like sending or shoulder tapping somebody to. And that's thinking, we've been talking, I guess, primarily like English into, but I'm thinking more about any language back into English. So if you have a small team, then also you're able to help them get that much closer to being effective. So it's kind of like outward and also
Yeah.
inward in terms of global.
What and you talked about kind of like some of the nuances of like different dialects and language. Like what sort of safeguards are in place? Is that where the kind of the
Mm.
human person kind of comes in just to double check that at the end, or how do you kind of ensure some of that and some of the cultural stuff and things that happen in kind of an AI
That's a really good
translation?
point. Yeah, I mean, I think depending on the if it's a regional dialect, I think we have something like 140 languages that we support, or like up to 280 language pairs or something like that.
Wow.
But I think, yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on the content, and I think you can give it instructions as well if you wanted to do like chain of thought prompting or, like customize the actual engine kind of orchestration. You can do all of that. That's getting way like for me, I start to get interested in that, right? Like to go like way under the hood. So the thing is, if you have those kinds of presets or instructions immediately, you may know, like, let's just give an example that you go, okay, in Italian, and it should know this. I think Anna knows it though. It's like we always use the formal.
Mhm.
Like you need to use the formal all the time in this, and like you may even if this is written in a like a informal English, it needs to be formal in this market. That would be something that you could tell it ahead of time and give it
Okay.
that kind of. You shouldn't have to, or you could probably correct it. But I go that may be something that companies spend a little time setting up, and then they're set.
So it's definitely not something that people just run and it needs some sort
Some
of like
people do though.
yeah,
Again, it depends on the visibility and the impact
use
and where
case.
they're going. And I will say some people say we do this and then we wait to hear back. And I just spoke to a customer a couple of days ago, and I won't name who they are, but on the legal side of things, they were doing only in English. Now they're doing 15 languages. And they
Wow.
previously they were sending it to an agency and it was like 3x the cost, and they were still getting complaints about the translation. She said that now we're sending it out and we've gotten no complaints, and people are responding to us in their own language, which means they're like connecting with the content in their own language and then replying, natively. So she said that's gone down. So I think in her, they're also kind of monitoring to see like what is feedback. So everyone's going to kind of roll it out differently and look for
Yeah.
those signals. But yeah, it's different.
That's cool. So how does like SmartBug support like the continuous learning and feedback, right? Because that sounds like an example of when you're getting that back from customers. Hey, it's not doing. How do you support that? Like, is there prompts inside the app or you know, like
Yeah,
how's that
so
done?
so so in Smartcat we have an editor, and that's where you can review segments and you can give it, feedback, and that's something that can like then becomes part of like your language graph. So
Hmm.
as you make those edits, that you shouldn't have to do, like if you're correcting something, it should. But then some folks actually seed it with things like glossaries or terminology pairs and things like that. But yeah, there's a mechanism for you. That's a layer that becomes, part of your, like I said, the language graph, that you can be correcting it. And over time, you shouldn't have to do as many of those corrections, or very few of them.
Right, as it gets familiar with kind of like what you're trying to accomplish there. Um,
Yeah, and by project, I mean, like, we're kind of talking generality, but I go like if you had a project that had specific instructions, you could do some prompting to, I mean, let's just think about it. You're completely different audiences, completely different like experiences, or you could do it if you needed to and just kind of like prep it for that.
cool. So now I'm curious, like, what have you seen? Like, what are some really innovative, like, productivity gains that like companies have seen, like, in kind of this space, or have you seen anything that's like you'd almost even call maybe a breakthrough that's kind of happened
Mm.
from what companies are how they're thinking about using AI translations?
I mean, I think, like I said, one of the biggest pieces is like bringing it closer to their outcomes, and more and less of an afterthought, doing their strategic planning when they start to do this. I think, the image translation's huge because there's very few, or and definitely no enterprise that I can think of that are doing this right now. So
Right.
that's going to change. Like probably you haven't even been thinking about localizing those, and they're like, that's too much work. That's too like we can do text, we can do all these things, but like this finished images is just not going to work either if it's in learning content or if it's in, I don't know, a product diagram or something. You kind of have been not considering it. So I do think that we do consider that a game changer, and I do think that's going to open up. I mean, it's in beta right now, so I go that's going to probably open up some really awesome things. We've already seen in e-commerce that people are using it to, show products, which, there are some stats about people are more willing to buy from, sellers who are showing products in their native languages. So we know that they'll connect to this. So I think that's probably one of the first places that it's going to take off is in e-commerce and in marketing, but we'll probably see the effects of like using that much later.
Where do you see this? Where do you see this going? Like, what sort of innovations do you see, or even Smartcat kind of cooking up? Because like, it seems like all the base stuff is handled now, or it's good enough. But is it just continuing to get
I think
incrementally better and better to like 99.9% right? Or
Yeah,
is
I
there,
think I think there's levers of quality that I always think that you could be getting better, and there. So I think that's going to be. I would also say that expectations are getting higher, right? So I
mm,
mean, people are kind of expecting AI to work, right? And sometimes it's not. I mean, like in general, like we know it's a machine, and there's different layers on top of that as well that gets it to great output. But I think now the way we talk about AI, like we are setting bars high, and everyone's going to have product experiences that match that. So I think we will continue to invest in quality and making sure that we can, delight people with what it can do and how quickly. So I think quality, speed, like I mentioned, being able to process
mm,
things in parallel. I mean, like the old way of doing it, like you couldn't send and say, translate this in 17 languages for me next week or in 30 minutes. And I mean,
right,
and that's
right.
that's the kind of gains that some people are getting. So I
That's
think that
true.
that's going to be interesting. But I think beyond that, I think getting into repurposing, remixing, reusing, then we start to blend the content generation, but I go not just generation, but like from source materials that they're using. We already do that with learning content. So you can upload courses and things that you've used. Maybe they need updating, maybe they need, and you can actually do that with our AI. But I think we'll probably be getting into other ways to do that. But I can see that being great because you already have the things that you want to communicate there, and you can remix them and experiment, and then also reach those global audiences.
Yeah, and you made a really good point that I don't even think is fully set in with me yet, but it wasn't what, 6, 9 months ago that we were all joking because AI was telling you to put glue on your pizza. Because
Yeah, or
somebody made
strawberries. It was disagreeing how many R's were in strawberry,
it
I
was
think.
stupid random stuff because it dug it up on Reddit and like we're not seeing any of that anymore.
I think
Um,
we'll still, I mean, so you
but
mentioned hallucinations earlier, and I don't know how much this audience is thinking about that. So, one of the biggest big wares, right, is hallucinations, which is
yes,
making stuff up. If
yes,
we had to making stuff up. And you can definitely see that if I start to go into something marketing and it's making up data points and I have to remind it on some things.
making up
I
quotes
actually
from
think
people.
that we're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna come to a really interesting crossroads of the people who built AI, and there's a lot of ways we could dig into that deeper, but let's just say you're building a performant product. Let's just start with that as like a base layer, and that's the
Uh-huh.
techie in me. You want a product that performs well, so you put in something and you get something out in a reasonable amount of time. That's one thing. I'm actually running more into omissions that I don't get as full or as deep or as a expansive enough of an answer. And I think that is the intersection of building something performant and trying to get an answer back to, the person who's working with it and actually going deep. And that's why we have things like ChatGPT, deep
Deep
research.
research.
And that's
Yeah,
why Gemini has deep research, because some of these queries are going to take more processing
sure.
power. And so I think that's going to be the interesting piece when you have a non-expert, right? So in some of the cases when I saw that there were omissions, I knew that they were supposed to be in there. But a non-expert, someone who wasn't familiar with the material, would have been like, okay, this is enough. And so that's where I think we're going to have some interesting learnings as we're marketing professionals, as we're GTM professionals. Like that's still the great intersection of like expert plus AI is going to be better work and great work, not like anyone's going to be able to do this work. I think that's the piece that we have to kind of keep in mind. I haven't
Yeah,
seen as much about hallucinations. The omissions has bit me a few times. I fight with AI sometimes and argue with them
yeah,
like, "Hey, are you sure you didn't you didn't leave that out?" "Oh, yes, I did." I mean, so that's
yeah,
the kind of thing that I go, we're going to have to train each other and like also keep the software accountable for that. But I think that's going to be some of the risk, right? Because the software engineers who built the backend don't want a query to run for 17 minutes,
right.
right, to give you an answer. So that's some of the stuff that I think is really interesting to see.
Yeah, and it's all good point. And I'm just trying to think like I don't see it arguing with me and coming up with as much crazy answers as it used to. And but to your point, like maybe that's because I've trained it or it's trained me or we've worked enough. But also I think the other thing that I've worried about the whole time is like people like us that have been in the workplace for decades, like we've built up this level of like competency, right? Like we've got the scars on our back of having to learn what is right and wrong, and now these things are good enough where junior people just won't be able to recognize it. And that's the biggest fear I have about all of this right now.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something in a leadership role we're going to have to figure out is like, and actually we're about to run an internal workshop on like generating content with AI and
Hmm.
teaching our sales and customer facing teams to do that because, you know, being a small company, we can't actually ghostwrite for everybody right now. We
Right.
want to teach them how to turn customer conversations and things into insights so they can then, you know, and then that's the thing we need to remember. AI can write a lot of stuff, but you have those customer insights, you have those conversations, those examples that are true and real that you can bring. And AI, that's the 20% that you know, and AI can help you with the 80% that's what I kind of see is that like I could have sat down and written that blog post and I use AI off and on for things, you know, but I use it more for editing, I would say, to critique my work probably personally. But I go like,
Sure.
but, but maybe 2 hours later, getting to that 80%, and I have them do a couple iterations and you know maybe in 15 minutes I've gotten to an 80% that I can modify. You know that 20% I'm still going to kind of, that's my expertise and that's my viewpoint. So that's, I think that's going to be the piece we're going to continue to kind of negotiate with AI is like,
Yeah.
what do we bring, what kind of insight, what kind of scars, what kind of you know, mistakes that we've made that help us, and then work with it to like get us to a better, like faster to things, I think is going to be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild. Let me ask you this. I was holding off on this earlier, but now I think it's probably the right time to ask. It's like with kind of AI able to do this translation layer, like what does that do long term for language, right? Like
Mm.
do we because we've seen over the last, and now I'm really going philosophical here, but like this is where the fun part comes, right? We've seen over the last, let's say, 100 years, how many languages have died off. Does this
Hmm.
accelerate this or does this preserve that because people can
Oh,
still continue to
interesting.
talk in a
I think
language? You
actually
know
it
what I
would
mean?
preserve
Like,
it. I think
I
it would
would think so
preserve it
too, because there's no
because
pressure
like
to
I'm thinking of the
like,
TikTok. I mean, I don't know if you were on TikTok enough, but they have this little thing that goes in your ear and it's doing instant translations for you. I think like the point is we want to globally communicate better,
yes,
right? And so we want to make it easier for companies to do that, faster for them to do that, and like for it to make sense, right? To be a part of like their core of what they do. And I think that's what all of this is doing is saying, hey, something that was an afterthought, let's make that part of our core, and then helps them connect with customers, helps us connect with each other. So I actually don't think that it like I think it can be. I think it's going to be easier. I mean, hopefully for these companies, maybe they have more official languages. Maybe they
yeah,
bring on a country that they couldn't operate in previously because they didn't have. I mean, I think it could open up a lot more.
yeah, I
But
think you're
it's a good
right.
question.
Well, because me selfishly saying, like, I know one language, I know English, and I want everybody to talk English so I could communicate with them. But and you see large parts of the rest of the world that learn English as a secondary language so that they can get into the American market or whatever it is. But that
Mm.
won't necessarily become necessary anymore. So people
Well,
can
I think that is your question though. Is
maybe,
Are we going to be in a world where English is the business language of the world? I don't know.
oh,
And
yeah, it
I
doesn't
think
need to be.
that's probably the one that, you know, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. And we should, you know, we should be figuring, I think that is probably the shift that I would see is if we can all communicate with each other with more ease, then the actual language that I speak probably becomes less important.
Yeah.
So whether or not English loses its, we're getting very philosophical here,
I'm,
whether or not English loses its like foothold as the primary business language. And I mean, there are probably countries like China and, you know, India would disagree with that already, right? I mean,
sure, sure.
I think that's probably something that we'll probably see accelerate, or, you know, I think maybe we'll become more multilingual as, you know, as a, I mean, how can we become more multilingual? I think we'll, you know, maybe be doing business in more and more languages.
I look, all right. One more follow up to that because to the multilingual point, right? There's a lot of data and search research out there that shows that people that are multilingual, the way their brains works because they're able to cross things in more unique ways, which is super useful in creative aspects. And like it's one of the big things I wish I was better at. I
Mm.
knew just enough Spanish to pass in high school and college, but like, do people not continue to flex that muscle and learn those additional languages to their detriment because they don't need to
Mm,
anymore?
no, well, again, I think like
I don't know, but it's
I
like this
think
is
that if you think about it again, it's like many people who don't speak English learn English. I think that's the piece that you're, I think that those people probably continue to do that, potentially. My kids are in immersion Spanish school learning
mm,
because I speak Italian fluently. I speak a little bit of Spanish as well. But I think, I mean, it is a good question. I go like, will they have as much incentive to do that? I do.
yes,
I think it can only grow until we get to the point where we all have something in our in our ear that's doing instant translation. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're gonna reach it on some other areas first, right? Whether or not
yeah,
you have a support team that only speaks one language or maybe speaks whatever language you hired them to do, but can handle any incoming language because
sure,
you have the tools. I think that's probably what we'll see. We'll see these multinational, multi-global workforces probably not worrying as much about what language they're working in.
yeah, yeah.
That's a little
Which
far out.
no, it's like, and thanks for like indulging me in that. This is just where my mind goes. Like, there's these really interesting other things that are coming that I hadn't really thought about because I haven't thought about the translation piece and definitely in the way that you have. Sarah, what kind of wrapping up time here because I want to be mindful of your time. What have I not asked you that I should have? What have we not talked about
Oh,
that we should
wow.
have talked about? Anything else that you could think about?
Well, I mean, next time we talk, we can talk about product marketing specifically and how the profession is changing a little bit. But I think I just want to continue to talk about that with others and like
Sure.
how do we all like evolve in the age of AI and like how is that going to make us better and what things do we start to say no to? So that's the thing that I'm kind of interested in hearing from other people on the podcast. So maybe that's like a push forward for you to ask other folks, even if they're not getting deep into AI.
I could do that. Let me ask you this, because one thing I've heard recently to get your perspective on it is because of the way AI is working and because some of the SEO stuff is changing, right? People don't need to worry about long tail content anymore, right? It
Mm,
doesn't
interesting.
convert. And so therefore, does product marketing become more the central aspect of marketing? Because you're talking about the pain, the use cases, the way to use a product. And we don't need to solve for like, hey, here's this article that answers 10 things about this is tangentially related to what we do because AI is answering that. You're not going to Google and searching for it anymore.
Well, and I think that I'm just talking to my friend who runs SEO, and yeah, that definitely there's some consideration. I think there's a different question here, if I can turn it
Sure,
around,
go for
which
it. Yeah,
is
yeah.
where are people going to be putting their attention in the future?
Mm,
And that is the piece, and whether or not AI emerges as this like, is that the first place I go? And for some things, it is, right? And you know, I do think the real time we're still not quite like not all the models have real time, and that's
sure.
that's the that's when we get it not necessarily hallucinations, but I go if you have a person who's not savvy and is using a model that only has information from November 24, so I go versus where do I go? Where's my first stop for information? And that probably will hit the tech folks first. And, we may lead the way, but I go the average person, where are they looking for information? Where is their attention? So that as a marketer, I can reach them. I think that is going to go through some major shifts in the next couple of years. And I think that's the part we'll probably need to be. Well, B2B is going to be different than B2C, for sure. I think
Yeah,
I think that B2B buyers are going to continue to look in certain places for information. But yeah, like you said, our relationship is going to change with how we search.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's teeing it up to where, product marketers could be more of the primary purpose of marketing, personally. And let me ask you this too. Like, there's always a debate you see now, like, where do you put the product marketer? Right? Like, do you
Mhm.
have a strong take on that? Because I mean, it just kind of my answer has always been it kind of it depends as a live in product or marketing. But what are you seeing and kind of hearing out
Yeah,
there on
that's
that?
that's I mean, I think also what do they own? And that starts to get into company maturity. That starts to get into,
Sure.
by the like, is it the first product marketing hire? I think like for me, and that's where I get excited by products. I'm always spending a lot of time with the product, and so whether or not I'm there with them or very closely working with them, I think doesn't matter as much to me. I think more I become a translator for the rest of the marketing team too, right, in terms of understanding limitations, opportunities, that kind of things. But I think, I mean, the wonderful and sometimes terrible part of product marketing is that it can live anywhere and it
Yeah.
can almost do anything. So I
Yeah.
think, I guess for people listening, it's more like being thoughtful about, when you're building out your organizations, what are they going to be responsible for? How are you going to track it? Because that's another thing, right? How do you have the person split their time between product adoption and, like GTM funnel generation is really interesting as well. So much. Feels like another hour we could fill with that.
Probably is. What we need to come back and dive into that because my background is a lot in products, so it's one of those things that I run into a lot. And having spent a lot of time building marketing products, like there's some aspect of product marketer in me too. And then content producer, all this, right? But there's very much that's a chicken or an egg, and there are very strong
Mm-hmm.
opinions about both. And the only way I end up is like, well, it depends. Like, and you have to think too as product-led growth has become bigger and bigger, like, well, that is all product marketing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're not doing all of this top of the funnel brand awareness, marketing and sales driven effort. It is all product driven. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it depends is the answer, I
it's
think,
the only
really.
answer.
So it's
Yeah,
the answer in the intersection. That's, I keep saying, we're at the intersection of so many things. It just depends where you are on the map.
totally,
So,
totally. Well, awesome, Sarah. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and incredibly insightful. And you've got my mind spinning in all the different ways that I've never even thought about how we can use AI as a translation area. But how could people help you? How could people find you? And what are ways that the audience can kind of support you and connect with you?
yeah, definitely. I think LinkedIn is still the place. I had a Substack, but I haven't really moved over from my old newsletter so much. So LinkedIn's a great place to connect with me. And I think there's some interesting stuff happening there. I think, like in terms of what people are sharing. I have like open office hours if people want to chat. I'm a networker. I love to
Cool.
meet people. So, working remotely 15 years, always interested in having a chat with people. So yeah, would love it if people reached out. And then, of course, if you want to learn more about Smartcat, happy to chat about that as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it. Well, thank you so much again. And for everybody out there, if you enjoyed this episode, 5-star review, nothing less. Only give it 5 stars. Please subscribe, like, share, review. And if you have an idea for a guest or something you want me to talk about, please feel free to reach out at research@360insight.com. And with that, everybody keep growing, and we'll talk to you again next week for another GTM Innovators. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.